Hello, welcome to my read-through of DC Universe Rebirth Detective Comics. I have decided that with the upcoming ending of James Tynion IV's run, I want to do a read-through of all the comics, one per day. I'm going to be doing two today because I didn't get all of my outlining and planning done yesterday, but we're going to catch up and move on from there. So this video is for number 934. This is the legacy numbering. During the New 52, DC went back to number 1 through number 52 with a couple annuals. But before they rebooted the universe with the New 52, they were at, I think, 882, which means that 52 plus 882, which was the end of The Black Mirror by Scott Snyder, and a truly excellent run by Snyder, artists Jock and Franco Francavilla. Then they added 52, so they got 934. Originally, James Tynion had planned to do up to issue 1000, and I had planned to do a video series where I read through not just the Detective Comics run, but also both of his runs on Batman Eternal, which very much are the predecessors for this series, this run. But since he's only going to 981, which is in 4 issues, issue 978 comes out next Wednesday. So this stack here is all my Detective Comics, and we're going to be adding some comics to the bottom as they come in and taking them off the top as we review them. But right now, we're going to get through 934. So there's going to be 6 parts to each one of these reviews. I'm going to go through the cover, and then I'm going to talk about the creators. I'm going to go through what I think the meaning or purpose of the comic is, of this issue. I'm going to do a highlight of one of the artistic panels or pages. There's going to be a section on connections to the past, so I'm going to try and keep this spoiler free. So when we get to each of these issues, it's a new thing, but I will try and call back to anything that we see in the issues previous to sort of show the construction, because I think one of Tynion's strengths is the way he builds up a story and a character run rather than just keeping everything static. And last, we're going to have a rating out of 10 stars. So, to begin with, this is the cover. This is by Eddie Barrows. Eddie Barrows is technically the main artist of this run, although he did not do the most number of interior issues. He did about, I think, 10 issues, whereas Alvaro Martinez did about 13, and other issues contributed between 2 and 3 issues a piece, spread out. This issue was shipping twice a month, therefore it was difficult for one art team to keep up with that. So Eddie Barrows was previously known for his work on Nightwing at the beginning of the New 52, written by Kyle Higgins. That is a very similar series in terms of the way he drew figures, but I think he has gotten better in this series. He does some interesting artistic things that I haven't noticed about his Nightwing series in the New 52, which we'll go over in the art section. You see here in this cover that you have a nice triangular construction of the main 3 Bat family members. So you have Batman, of course, in the middle, and the highest in the center row. But you also have Batwoman, slightly higher than Tim Drake, sort of showing that she is ostensibly more important in the organization of the group that we're going to discover in this issue than Tim is, but Tim is the third in command. And then you have Stephanie Brown Spoiler and Clayface roughly on the equal. They're sort of outsiders to the team, so that's why I think that Barrows drew them in the background or flying off. And lastly, we have, of course, Cassandra Cain, who is calling herself Orphan here. This was a new costume for the Rebirth initiative. The body part is very similar to what she wore in Batman and Robin Eternal, where James Tynion reintroduced her, but the skull mask is sort of a earless version of what she wore as Batgirl. Unfortunately, James Tynion has said that they weren't allowed to have any bat imagery or iconography with Cassandra because they don't want her confused with Barbara Gordon. As a fan of both Cass and Steph as Batgirl, that annoys me greatly, but I can't do anything about it. So I'm very glad that she's part of this series. So this team framing and this specific construction is going to be very important as we go forward. This is the first cover. It was used as the cover of the deluxe hardcover edition, although it was not used as the cover of the first trade collection. The first trade collection had a new piece of artwork by Eddie Barrows that sort of, I think, fit better on a trade rather than the hardcover that the deluxe edition is. But this is the mission statement. This was the first revealed image for Detective Comics Rebirth. And since Eddie Barrows provided the most covers, he provided 20 of the 48 covers, he is very much the tone setter for this series. So let's move on to the creative team. I've already talked about Eddie Barrows, but then we have James Tynion IV. He is an American writer. He is one of the youngest writers working at this level for DC, and he got his start working for Scott Snyder as a backup writer for the Batman title, and then he spun out to write a spin-off of the Court of Owls called Talon. He then continued to work with the Batman backups, and then in 2014, he got his own Batman series called Batman Eternal, which was a weekly, year-long miniseries, I guess you could call it, because it had a beginning and an end. But it was a year-long, so it was very significant. He wrote the most issues in that, and he was overseeing the structure of that whole series. And that's where he brought back Stephanie Brown. And then he wrote Batman and Robin Eternal, which is 26 issues, half a year, also weekly, also with a group of writers, where he brought back Cassandra Cain. And now he got a chance to do Rebirth, and he has said that he wasn't necessarily planning on this team concept to be Detective Comics, but he did always want to do this, probably as what he would have called the third Batman Eternal series. So Tynion is a big fan of comics from the 90s, Chuck Dixon's Robin, and then comics from the early 2000s like Jeff Johns' Teen Titans run, which is why you have these specific characters chosen. So the point of this comic is, of course, to set up the team. You see, as we get towards the end, this comic mostly has Batman revealing himself to Kate, although she tells him that she actually knew who he was for a year, which we'll find out later in this run. But as you can see here, this is Batman and Batwoman giving the boot camp lecture to the team because they have an army that's facing them that we will learn more about as we go on. But you see these armies are all dressed as militarized bats. So in the beginning, one of them attacks another hero, Jean-Paul Valley, called Azrael, who will become more important, and he was also part of Batman and Robin Eternal. He wants to train these vigilantes to become a team. So this is setting up the team. It gives a little intro for every character. And every character gets a really cool action moment. We get hints of the relationships between them. And so that's the purpose. This is basically just setting up the conflict with the army and also setting up each of the team members and then putting them all together. An art highlight for this one by Barrows again. This section about Clayface. Clayface is what we might call the breakout character. He's the one who has the most new fans and the most positive response in reviews and responses to this run. He initially starts as an escapee from Arkham Asylum here. He just wants to watch one of his old movies, and Batman offers him a chance to become better. And here, the reason I'm selecting this as the art highlight is because you can see you have Clayface here in a very line-heavy and detailed penciling style, but then this backdrop of Clayface is in almost a painted style, where Barrows drew the outlines and then the rendering, all the shading and the little lines were done through the coloring process. So it looks like a painted panel. And this is the thing I was talking about where I don't remember seeing Barrows doing it in his previous run on Nightwing or anything else I've watched him do. But it's something that really sets apart this run of Detective Comics. It doesn't have a ton of meaning attached to it, although I do think that every time you see that sort of soft outline, that painted feeling, he's going for a very emotional effect. Here, you definitely have the feeling that Clayface is very depressed, very sad, mournful that he's a monster and that he's lost what he was before. And you see here, you also have the painted rendering for the movie showing the emotional connection that he has to his old self and the feeling that he's lost it. See, here's the hard edge present and the soft edge past. So I think there is some meaning. It's not as meaningful as it could be, but this is comics. Comics just has bits of meaning that are put together into the larger meaning. So connections to the previous issues. Obviously, I've already gone through the connections to the two Eternals, but there is one more connection I want to bring up. Stephanie Brown is mentioned as having been trained by Catwoman. She was actually trained by two Catwomen, and this is during the series by Genevieve Valentine with art by David Messina. This cover is by Kevin. I don't remember what his name is, but he's a very famous artist for covers. And he did the covers for the last 6 issues of Valentine's run on Catwoman. And here is Steph being trained by the mob boss version of Catwoman. But she was also trained by the second Catwoman, Aiko Hasegawa. Very good run. Not really the kind of thing I think most Catwoman's fans enjoyed, because Catwoman herself had very different personal relationships and a different modus operandi, although she was functioning as Catwoman by the end. But it's a very dark, very noir series. Controversial, didn't sell as well as I think it deserved for all the complexity and polished dialogue I think it had, but it was very good. But here you can see there's a little clumsiness in the writing here. Tynion says that she's a daughter of a genius. She's been trained by 2 geniuses. That repetition of genius in 2 voice boxes right next to each other I think is clumsy. And Tynion's dialogue is not necessarily his strongest suit, but he's got a real sense for fun, quippy dialogue. So when you're giving this kind of more intensive exposition, I think that's where he tends to fumble a little bit more. But I think it's still very serviceable. One thing I forgot to mention during the cover section is that every single variant cover was done by artist Raphael Albuquerque, who is famous for having worked on American Vampire. He also did a run on Batgirl with Hope Larson at the beginning of DC Comics Rebirth. Here is the variant cover for 934. You see it's very visually pleasing. I really like a lot of him. I actually bought 20 of the variant covers instead of the main cover. So obviously I got the main cover for this one, but here's the variant cover digitally. There you see the distinct purple color of the Rebirth Batman, so that's and the Rebirth outline in that specific way. That's designed by Greg Capullo at the end of the Super Heavy arc, collected in the Bloom trade. But this is very generic, and it doesn't have that team flavor, which is why I didn't get this variant. I did get a lot of variants, but not this one. So that wraps us all up. I'm going to give my rating for this. I think, in general, this series is very high quality. I don't think it ever gets to a really great level, but it's very good and is very consistent. There's only a couple times where it dips below that quality, and I think that gives it a very high rating. So I'm going to say this is a 7 out of 10 star comic. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back with 935 later today.